Dutro, aka the Force Plate Guy. What's up, man? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's like we were talking about just a minute ago. I've spent a lot of hours listening to this, so to be on the other end of the microphone maybe is a little bit interesting and a little wild. But I'm very honored to be here, and thank you so much for doing this and having me. And I can't wait, man. This is definitely bucket list stuff for me, so I'm
Oh,
excited.
you're too kind. You're too kind. I appreciate you listening. We've known each other for a long time. We just caught up at the PGA show and at the Open Forum, which is always an interesting deal. And you were speaking, right? Didn't you speak at Open Forum? I
Yeah,
was I
I
was in and out.
was.
I think I missed you, but I know you were on the list.
They put us on at 3:30 a.m. We were the
You were
we
the
were the
closer.
yeah, we were the closers. So yeah, so for the people that were left and for the people showing up for breakfast that morning, it was pretty. I think a lot of people thought, you know, you know how it goes, man. People want a reaction, and people in our industry, some don't believe in ground force, some do, and I think at that event they are serving alcohol, so by that
Oh yeah.
point, people were willing to share their feelings and their thoughts on the subject, and I thought for the most part it was pretty compared to years past. It was pretty uneventful. There were no fist fights.
I know there was nobody ran after somebody else and yelled at somebody on the stage. I mean,
So I
what the
haven't
heck?
seen the video. I know that eventually the video comes out, and I'm very interested to see it because I've been told that the expressions on Dr. Greg Rose's face were something to be seen during that presentation, and I just can't wait to kind of go back and watch it. And because when you know how it is, you've done this stuff
Yeah.
before, man.
Oh
Like
yeah.
when you're on the stage, you're so trying to not look stupid or do something stupid or especially with the guys I'm with, they're all absolute Mount Rushmores of the industry. So for me, it was just try not to do anything stupid, and you don't really get to really take in what's going on because you're so kind of focused on you. But I'm
Sure.
I'm excited to watch it because I'm sure there was a lot of good stuff that came out that I couldn't hear.
Well, tell me what you thought was controversial. Like, I mean, before we get into it, I mean,
And credit, I think that there were two people that were supposed to present before we did, and that was Mike Malaska and Dennis Sells. And for
oh wait,
whatever reason,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it wasn't Alaska. It was oh shit. Now I'm gonna
Manavian, excuse me, Mike
Manavian. Yeah, Michael
Manavian.
Manavian.
Excuse,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I'm sorry,
yeah,
excuse
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. So
Um,
there, yes, guy Dennis on the pod, and he was talking the anti. He was like the other side of it, right?
yeah, which is
Not
totally
being.
fine,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
respect. He has a gear system and he looks at stuff, and
right.
he had the. I always tell people this. I watch everybody present because they have the integrity to present what they believe in. So at the end of the day, Dennis has had success, or he wouldn't be Dennis.
Yeah, he's
So
great.
Dennis has
Yeah.
something that's good, right? So my
Mm-hmm.
job isn't to judge Dennis. My job is to learn from Dennis. So I told him after his presentation, I said, "Hey man, well done, good job." And he obviously said some things I wouldn't agree with, but
Okay. Yeah.
that's okay, man. Like two things can be right at the same time, and we don't have to go to war over everything.
Yeah.
So, I think though some of the things he said, maybe with the rest of the group I was with, maybe didn't sit as well. And maybe, and I don't blame those guys. They've been fending this stuff off for years. But, we measure stuff, they measure stuff, we're all measuring things.
Yeah.
And I think it's more about kind of coming together and bringing down the walls of the silo and just trying to look at this for more of a complete picture. And I just don't think our industry is ready to do that just yet. Maybe not our country either, but
Yeah. Yeah. Understood. Understood.
I don't
So
want to say anything controversial because I thought Dennis had some really good points in what he
yeah.
said, and I think a lot of people because he says certain things are like, oh, I'm gonna tune that completely out because there's nothing good here. Well, that's not the case. Sometimes
Yeah.
you gotta listen to the whole story to get the context.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I'm gonna have him back on to kind of talk about it because I've known Dennis forever and very smart coach, and I don't think he was saying it was that he doesn't believe in ground reaction forces. I think more he was just saying he doesn't feel the need to measure every player, right? Which is, I mean,
It's fair.
we all use tech, and we're gonna get into that too. It's like, what part of tech do we use the most? Like, what's appropriate for each player, and whatever whoever's in front of us.
I'm very
So
fortunate.
yeah,
I was lucky enough to kind of get some foresight early on in my career and understood that I needed to have my own roof over my own head. That was going to give me the freedom to become who I wanted to be. And then because of having some great people behind me, I've been able to buy a lot of tech. And dude, I have
Yeah.
everything. Like
I know
I'm
you do.
so
We talked
spoiled when
about
it comes to that. Like
it.
I trust me, if you want to look at a graph or a number or something, I got it. And the thing is like people a lot of times think that if you come and work with me, that it's tech overload. But I teach a lot of golf lessons where the only tech we use is like the TrackMan or the Foresight that's
Sure.
giving us ball flight because I'm inside.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of times to where, I think the art of coaching really gets lost in translation because if I have somebody coming in that's like having all kinds of issues outside of golf and then they're blaming like a bad golf swing for why they're so frustrated, I need to talk to that person about their human skills and like emotionally
Yep.
regulating
Yep.
before we're going to get anywhere in this golf lesson.
The EQ.
So it's, yeah, right. So, as much as I would love to just throw people on force plates and go, okay, let's do this and let's do that, unfortunately, a lot of people just aren't in a place to where they could even accept that, let alone make that applicable, let alone take something away from it that's going to make them better tomorrow. And
Yeah.
that's really all I'm trying to do for people is, hey, here's what we're going to do in the next, 7 days. It's going to help you get on the path to playing some better golf.
Yeah. I mean, it's up to us as coaches to sort of figure out what that player needs, as we call it. Read the room, right? Get to know your player, get to know the relationship
I
of
track the
how they
crazies.
learn, right? Well,
I
we
tracked all
all
the crazies,
we
man.
all
Like
together. Yeah.
with my YouTube and with the podcast
Yeah.
and with the
Yeah.
force plates and like, I get that guy that's like, hey man, I'm super analytical. I want to book 4 hours and I want you just to hit me over the head with it. And
Yeah.
it's like, those are the guys you really have to pump the brakes with. And I think as a young coach, I made the mistake often with that type of person to where I would kind of almost like be the good drug dealer and just like they showed
Yeah.
up looking for a fix, so I would give them the fix. And I've learned maybe through a little bit of experience that for those guys, it's like, dude, they're so lost looking at trees and different types of leaves and this, like, they can't see the forest anymore.
Yeah.
And like our job as a coach is to take that kind of guy that's so lost looking at trees and go, hey man, if you just like squint a little bit, do you kind of see the forest there? Because like if we can own that, we can play golf. But if we can't own what the forest looks like, man, we're in trouble because we can't ever find it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they show up with good intentions, but then
Yeah.
might find that, hey, this is a little too much, or that's why then we can talk about questions that we ask in an interview, right? So how important is that? And I was like, how do you want to learn? Right, it's a great question because it's like, one, to see if they even have an answer, and to two, to see if they understand how they learn best. Are they visual? Are they kinesthetic? Are they a field player? Whatever. I mean, they're all. I
Yeah.
feel like everybody's sort of a combination of all of it. But I think they've got to understand that we have to do our job, and if they let us get through the weeds, we'll make it as simple as we can with a very complicated, concept or whatever we're trying to work on with them.
But the golfer too is, and it's by and large not their fault. It's mostly our
Sure.
fault within the industry. But
Yeah.
there's two types of learning, and I think we've forgotten this with time. But there's explicit learning, and that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. And it's like the whole mama bird shows up to the nest and like feeds the babies by yakking. And I like. It's just there's that type of learning, and I think everybody is really accustomed to that with YouTube and there being all this information readily available to everybody. And like that's one type of learning, and it's an important one because you can't feel something that you don't understand or don't, there's a lot that you do have to kind of learn. But once you have that explicit learning, then we have the implicit learning. And that's really where the gold happens, and that's where the ownership happens, and that's where you
Yeah.
go out there and back in the day they used to say you had to dig it out of the dirt. Well, that's what you were doing. You were teaching yourself through trial and error and through repetition. And so many of these young players that I'm fortunate to work with that are, just these amazing players, it's just like, hey, what's the lesson plan this week? What's the lesson plan? What do I do? What do I do? How many reps? How do I do that? And it's like we got to create some space for some creativity and some freedom
Uh-huh.
and allow for these juniors to start owning, what it is. Like how do I make the ball go higher? You were asking questions, right? I like to think some of my best lessons are just questions. And it's like, hey, man, can you make that ball go higher? Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, can you make it go higher than that? Oh, sweet. Okay, what about even higher? Can you do that? And
Yeah.
you just kind of,
Exploring and self discovery is I think a lost art as well, right? I mean, and sometimes they don't know how. They don't need to know exactly how they did it.
yeah.
It's just changing the intent. Is
Like
obviously
your son's a high level player,
right.
competitive player. And I would be willing to bet that if I took you and I said, hey, Jason, you got 20 minutes of free time, and here's this unbelievable short game area that we just designed over here. It's just super tricked out. It's awesome. And here's one ball, and here's one wedge, and I need you to go over there and just do your thing for 20 minutes, and we'll come get you when we're ready. I would say that like if I put you into that environment, dude, you would literally look up and they'd be like, okay, we're ready. Whoa, whoa, whoa! I only got a like. I guarantee you would be because that's how we learn, man. We
Yeah.
spent so much more time alone by ourselves, practicing and playing and learning. But your son, right, who's probably grown up a little bit more under your wing and in
Oh
the
yeah.
golf academies and around these elite players, like he's bored to death in 5 minutes. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's ready for the next thing. Hey, I need to go work on the next. Like they really just don't like to go and shake the monkey tree very much a lot of times. They like to figure out X equals Y, and then they
Yeah.
like to really try to memorize X. But that's once again not their fault. That's just how the education system teaches people to learn now. And
Yeah.
it's way about regurgitation than it is about like actually
Mm.
critical thinking.
Yeah. Boy, that's a whole nother can of worms right there. Yeah, I'm with you. All right, so
So,
let's let me reel you back in a little bit here because
ooh,
that was awesome. That was an awesome start because that's kind of how I like to roll. It's very conversational, and then we're gonna have some fun. But I wanted to start with just speaking of language and sort of how we define things, whether we're talking to coach or talking to our students. And I've heard you talk on your podcast and then another podcast when you were a guest. So it's a good lead in to kind of lead us down a good discussion with reaction forces and whatnot. But how would you define body pivot?
so when I think of pivot, I think there's a lot of different ways you can kind of look at it. And the reason I think that is because I think if you're talking about a pivot, in my mind, we're kind of talking about if there was a stake, a vertical stake, and let's just say that we extended that vertical stake through the spine, how would that stake kind of move left or right from the frontal perspective? All right. And then if we kind of think about that as being the pivot, it's okay, we twist around that kind of stake or we twist around that spine. And that's how I would kind of mentally imagine what a pivot looks like moving through time and space. But the thing that I know is that as a human being, we are three dimensional. So I know that the pivot has to be a three-dimensional motion. A three-dimensional moment arm. And that's how I kind of define it and look at it. And it's awesome that now a lot of the force plate companies are providing center of mass to
Yeah.
go along with center of pressure because when you're looking at the pivot and you're looking at the moment arm, I think they're kind of related. So you have to look at both at the same time. And now we can kind of do that through separating the pressure versus the mass, which I think is where a lot of the industry's just kind of lost on the whole subject, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, if you could define that, I think that would help. Like for coaches, I mean, there's some players that listen to this, but mostly coaches. But I think the
Yeah, it's pretty
moment arm
easy,
can
man.
be, yeah. I
So
think
check this out. So if you just kind of think about this, if you just were standing up, and I'm not saying do that because we both have like microphones and stuff we got
yeah,
to deal with, but if we were just standing up and we were marching back and forth in place, we're not going anywhere. We're just picking our knees up, marching in place. Your pressure is transferring 100, 0, 100, 0, right? Because you're picking one foot up off the ground, so all the pressure is going to be on the other foot. So if we think about just marching in place, obviously the spine isn't really moving left or right very much, but the pressure is.
mm,
So if we were looking at the pressure, or the center of pressure, I should say, if we think about that as a dot that's moving back and forth between the feet as we pick up the feet, right? If we kind of think about that, it's moving a good deal, but that center of mass is staying relatively the same and not moving in the middle. So there's this distance that happens between those two things, and that is kind of what we talk about when we talk about a player pivoting or getting behind the ball or all of those types of things, is trying to create a distance to where we now have time to accelerate, which is a moment arm.
Yeah, so the distance between the center of pressure and the center of mass.
Right. And both of those
Yeah.
things move in three directions, so it's just three dimensional,
Right.
which is the part that kind of tricks people up. It's not
Right.
just front back or front back. There's also a left right in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we've talked, and I'm using Smart to Move now, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is a great product. I think you have it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you
I
have
do.
everything. What and I know you're swing catalyst guy as well. Like
Yeah.
what talk about what those are measuring, right? The three forces, and then obviously torques are
Right.
important as well. Talk about how you, and then we'll get into some details of like how we teach our players with it, but just give
Yeah.
some background on it.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things to where a lot of I'm not that far from Detroit, the Motor City, and force plates are actually pretty common and have been around for a while in the automotive industry because obviously we need to understand how we brake a car and slow it down and how we apply pressure to these things and like don't break the brakes. So like that all has kind of existed in this space, but I got into it just because I didn't understand golf swings. I didn't understand them at all. It didn't make sense to me. Everybody was doing something different. I would kind of think I figured out one thing here and then I'd lose it over there, and I just couldn't make sense of it all. And then somebody recommended force plates, and that kind of led me into this kind of avenue of looking at the one thing that we actually can't see in the golf swing. So we can see the club moving, we can see the ball fly, we can see all these things with our naked eye, but what we don't see is how our pressure is being expressed across the ground with our feet. And that's really, really important because, as we know, we tend to use our legs to create a lot of the energy that we use when we're doing athletic movements. So, long story short, the force plates are really, really cool because a couple of them are now like kind of doing some stuff to where, like my swing cap, for example, they have the pressure heat maps on top of the force plates. So now we're able to look at both pressure and force simultaneously,
Mm-hmm.
which is really, really cool. And I think the thermography or the heat map makes it super easy for people to kind of understand more so than those dots that I was just trying to explain. But with the Smart to Move, we get really good force plates. They do three-dimensional force plates just like my Swing Cat do. But the nice thing we get there is that they're portable. So even though I don't get the heat map, I get some portability. And it's just like launch monitors. I tell people, TrackMan is superior at some of the things it does, just like Foresight is superior at some of the things it does. And every system, just every piece of technology really, has its strengths and has its weaknesses. And really, at the end of the day, I think Ball On, the new company making, a $600 insole that you put in your shoe, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a great product. And I really think that a lot of people would be way better off starting by understanding pressure and how pressure moves and works throughout the golf swing
Yeah.
before they start getting into the graphs and the forces and the torques. Because honestly, Jason, it feels like you have to have a PhD to teach golf anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I that's a question I get from a lot of other coaches is like, how often do you use the force plates? I'm like, not with every student, but it can be used with all levels as long as it's up to us as coaches to show the student what they need to see,
Yeah,
right? It's just like when, I use TrackMan on every single lesson, but I don't put all 26 numbers up,
yeah,
right? I might have two or three or six or my normal whatever. So I might typically when I use Smart to Move with a member golfer, I just got the feet up there, right?
mm-hmm.
I'm just showing them how they're moving, where the pressure's moving. And I love one of your statements that I heard in another interview is it's like, let's get rid of the word weight shift, right? I'm like,
Yeah,
I've been talking about that for years. It's like, stop. It's just such a harmful thing for average golfers. Let's talk
it's not
about,
helping. It's
right?
not
Just
helping.
like you were talking about, but picking your feet up and putting them back down. That's all we're doing is we're pushing into the ground. We're not
That's it.
shifting our center of mass miles off the ball.
No, hopefully
Yeah,
not.
right. Exactly.
Right. I
So
mean, it's
yeah,
just everything in golf. I mean, if you go back, I'm not much of a history buff. I can't remember things that well, but I do go back, and I'm very curious. And I've read some stuff that's written in Gaelic from the Scottish Highlands about the subject of the golf swing. Thank God for Google Translate. But it's just like amazing at how golf is kind of just it works itself in these like little flavors and these little ideas, and it's very cyclical. It all comes back in
yeah,
vogue. And the funny thing is, this is really cool. Hang on. I can't remember the name. A client of mine, cool guy, brought me this. It's called the Controller. It's a registered trademark. The Fairway Driving Iron. It's got 17 degrees aloft. Okay, so I don't know if you
Yeah.
can see that. Okay,
Yeah.
but let me
Yeah.
turn it sideways. You notice anything? It's kind of hard to see on the camera. It's got a massive amount of bulge and roll.
Yeah, it's got some. Yeah, there's some gearing.
See
Oh
that?
yeah. Oh yeah. You can definitely see it from the bottom. Definitely some bulge and roll.
So it's like, we act like Bryson is the great innovator, right? And it's like, well, Bryson is a very smart guy, and I'm not taking a single thing away from the guy. I think what he's done is very impressive. But he's not creating net new ideas. He's just one of those guys like you and like me who's constantly in the rabbit holes
Yeah. It's
and
curious.
finding these cool things that,
Yep.
maybe somebody, had this great idea of bulge and roll on an iron face, but they couldn't figure it out because the technology wasn't there at the time or whatever the case may be, and it gets mothballed for a while. But then a guy like Bryson picks it up years later, and it's like, well, look at this. This might actually be the
Yeah.
answer for these high ball speed guys that have a hard time hitting the middle of
Right.
the face.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah,
So
it's just cool
so
stuff like that.
yeah. I mean, I think so. Let's dig into like some of the stuff we teach on a day-to-day basis, right? I think it's interesting. I always ask a question like, what's it look like, to take a lesson from you, or I think would be a lot of fun to kind of take us through one, since I'm sure you've got tons and tons of force plate data over the years because you've got every piece of measuring tools available to you. Like, talk about starting from setup. What do you? Because I think we all have preferences, right? But I think our preferences tend to come from what works, right? And we figure out what doesn't work. So talk
Yeah.
about like what you like to see in setup as far as pressure goes. What are you seeing the difference in like your better players versus your average golfers
Yeah.
and how they move?
Yeah. It's funny, like from a day to day perspective, it's funny. I laugh all the time. I go home and I tell my wife, she's like, well, how was today? And I was like, I did a lot of posture coaching. And she's like,
Yep.
like, she just kind of looks at me funny because she doesn't really get what I do. But like, it's funny, man, because I do feel like a professional posture coach because honestly, that's what I spend the bulk head of my time working with people on due to the fact that from the time you start the backswing to the time you hit the ball, you have 1 second. And there's going to be very little you're able to change and do once you put that club into motion in 1 second. So really how we set up is very, very important, and it's going to allow us to be able to move in certain ways. So the biggest pet peeve of mine, to kind of answer your question, is that, when force plates were kind of new and we were getting captures, we kind of told everybody that you need to load into your trail heel. And I think
Mm-hmm.
now we're all very aware of the negative consequences of loading into the trail heel. And we're very aware that the pressure needs to be loading through the balls of the feet. And that's where we kind of want to keep our athletes is up on the balls of their feet. Now, if you go and look at most golfers when they're playing golf, especially for my friends that can't turn and tend to get very, very steep or shallow and kind of have low point issues, but for my people who are either drop kicking it or getting super over the top, if you look at them at setup from down the line, I almost guarantee you, Jason, their butt is so far behind their heels that they look
Mm.
like they're trying to do their best Kim Kardashian.
Okay.
Okay? So when we push our butt way back posteriorly like that, what ends up happening is that curve in your lower back, that lower lumbar area, you have joints in there called facet joints. And when you push your butt back, you lock those joints.
You get X
So
curves
here's the
as
fun thing. Yep.
TPI calls it, right? Yeah.
Yep. So once you've locked that curve, guess what happens? You now can create zero thoracic mobility, which in golfers' terms means you can't turn. And the only thing you can do is pull the club behind you. And that's what I tend to see is golfers sitting on their lazy boy and trying to pull the club behind them. And I probably spend the bulkhead of my time with my general population golfers, general population players, just getting them into a decent posture and getting them in a position to where they're actually using the correct fingers. So if you said, what do I do on a daily basis? I'd say I'm kind of like Brooks Koepka's favorite coach, a lot of posture, a lot of grip, and a lot of alignment, because
Uh-huh.
those are the three things that, really not really any level, at all the levels, those are the things that really make the biggest change day to day for the golfer, because generally they tend to be making more or less the same swing.
So you're seeing more heels than toes? Is that
A
what I'm
lot of
hearing?
heels, a lot of people
Okay.
sitting back, heels,
I
and it's
wonder. I wonder if that's. I mean, again, I know you don't work in a club, right? I'm just kind of brainstorming here as far as the environment, because I'm seeing the opposite.
yeah,
I'm seeing so many. Because I'm the reason I say that is like pickleball has gotten so popular, and
yeah,
obviously tennis, and at the club, 90% of my players that make mistakes are too much out in front of their feet,
mm-hmm,
like on their toes,
mm-hmm,
which I always say great for jumping, not real good for rotation and pushing up, a lot of
yeah.
times. So I wonder if that's the difference between being like in an indoor place versus, but I don't know. I'm sure your clients are all members in other clubs too, but I don't know. It's just interesting. Yeah, I don't see as much. Not that I want them in the heels, but I kind of like them in the middle of their feet.
Yeah, there's a bone in your foot called the cuboid,
Mhm.
cuboid, and when you look at the center of pressure, it kind of parks right. So if that's your right foot, your
Mhm.
cuboid's kind of there behind your pinky toe.
Gotcha.
So Dr. Joe Lacaze was very nice to help me kind of understand some of this a little bit, but we know that that's the point where that center of pressure has to go through.
Mhm.
And if we get it going back into the heel, the problem is that what happens is the right leg extends and the bones kind of straighten and the hip goes up and backwards away from the ball. And now the issue is that you can create like a lot of what I call fake turn. It looks good, it looks deep, but
Mhm.
the issue is that they don't get any pressure into their trail side and they're very underloaded. And then when they try to get out of that, because that right leg is straight and they're more into the heel, you obviously you can't jump out of a heel, so they really
Right.
just have to drag it with their left side across the body versus being able to create that AP that we know so many golfers struggle with.
Yeah, yeah. Just so I'm clear, because again, I think it's sometimes it's language semantics and
Yeah.
whatnot, but um, like with the diagrams that say smirk to move,
Hmm.
and you got the toes, then you got like the ball of the foot. So you want it right in the middle of the ball of the foot, or you're like describing just behind the ball of the foot, which is kind of what I like to see,
I
or
would
I've
say
seen
if you
players.
put that front ball and you split it in half,
Yeah, yeah.
if you split that in half vertically, the right side just behind where the middle would be is where I
Okay,
would say I would want to see it.
gotcha. So that's where you
And
like
if
to
you
see them
look, if
set
you
up.
Google cuboid, it'll show you exactly where it is on the foot, and that's
Gotcha.
where you're going to see that with your good players, it does scoot back a little bit. I'm not saying that like that
Good.
dot from where
Yeah.
it starts on the ball
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
scoot back. It does for sure,
Yeah, we would. Yeah, but
for
not dead
sure,
in the heel. Yeah, I'm with you.
but
I'm
not
with you.
just jumping straight
Yeah,
back into the heel. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. And then obviously the being out in your toes and the backswing is be the same thing, right? Be
You're right.
not good, which is what I'm seeing most players that actually don't push up enough. They don't use their verticals to create the AP. Don't get any depth at all, or the correct depth, like you would say. And they're dead in the water
Smartest
as
thing I've
well.
heard in a while. My trainer said this. I've got a full-time trainer in house. He's amazing. His
Mm-hmm.
name's Aram Kashigian. But he said this, and it's like very Mr. Miyagi, which I tend to like, and it makes me sound cool like Sean Foley. But he said, he said you want to swing your body around the club, not the club around the body.
Hmm. Okay.
And it's really kind of crazy because if you think about Dr. Thomas Meyer's spiral lines and how that all kind of works through the anatomy,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of are really like kind of almost twisting the club opposite of how the body's moving in a very weird way. And it's just one of those things, man, to where you start diving down these rabbit holes and you find weird stuff, but that's one of them. And
Yeah.
that's for us, it's just so many golfers are just trying to move the club, and it's just from the very jump when we're young. Like for me, I was very young the first time I hit a golf ball, and I probably was like pulling on my dad's pant leg, and I'm like, "Hey, Dad, how do I do this?" And he's like, "I don't know, hit the ball." And I grabbed the golf club and I hit the
Yeah.
ball, and it's
Sure.
like mission accomplished. I got a Snickers. Everybody was happy. So at the end of the day, like I think most of us are just so consumed with the shiny thing on the end of the stick that we kind of forget that like a lot of things have to move to get that thing to move. Like the shiny thing should be the last thing to leave the train station. It shouldn't be the first thing to leave the train station.
You're talking about takeaway. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I see that. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. You
Yeah.
know,
Like what Tattersall talks about, like because
I
pulling
love
everything,
John.
pulling everything up,
I did
and
not. I'm so bad. I live on an island, man. Like people think I'm
we
like paying
gotta get
attention.
you down
I'm
south, dude,
I'm
closer to us.
so I just live on my little island up here in Michigan.
Yeah,
But I recently came across John, man, and I think,
he's one of my
holy
great
smokes,
friends. Yeah,
dude, I think he's amazing. I think he is
he's
so
really good.
smart, and we got in this. Him, Blackburn, and myself got in this great debate at the top 100 down at Cabot. Oh my God, man, it was so awesome because Tattersall and Blackburn know each other so well, and they're
Oh
just
yeah,
going back and forth.
yeah,
And I just love it because I just sit there and learn. So it's great.
yeah. So definitely, yeah, because there's two schools of thought, and again, I'm not trying to play too much devil's advocate here. With club, does the club move the body, or does the body move the club? I mean, there's a lot, on both sides of that. I know your philosophy, so body first, club second, which is really cool.
I would
But
say this though, I have so many players, and I think this is worth saying too. I have so many players that the minute I try to talk about their feet, or the minute I try to talk about pressure or force or any of it, the minute I bring any awareness to anything other than their hands, they are way worse off. Like way worse off.
there you go. Yeah,
And like the thing, and this isn't necessarily a brag, but I am a TrackMan master, and there's only 87 of those in the world because they take that stuff kind of serious when you do that. And the reason that I wanted to be a TrackMan master is I really want to understand both ends of the spectrum. We've got inputs in what we're doing to the club, and then we've got outputs and how the ball's moving and how the club's moving through time and space. But the cool thing is, and this is where I want our industry to get to, and if I have a message to share with your audience, like you can't have one without the other. You
there you go.
can't have kinetics
Yeah,
without kinematics. You can't have kinematics without kinetics. And for the guys and gals that are like, I don't really believe in ground force or I don't think that's useful or meaningful, I hate to tell them, but when they're giving their clients golf lessons and changing positions and doing what they do, they are changing the kinetics as well. They
hmm
are. It's
yep,
just they might not agree with that or they might not want to see it that way, but like I said, two things can be true at the same time.
yeah. I mean, that's my point. Hopefully, you understand where I'm coming.
100%.
As it, I think I've heard you talk about this, but we have pressure in the hands, we got pressure in the feet, right? There's only two connections in golf,
That's it.
one to the ground and one to the club. And for the 75% of my day teaching the member golfer, you better help them understand how to use their hands and how that affects the way the club moves and the club face and all that. But then all that stuff, exactly what you said, is affecting how they use the ground, right? So it's just a different perspective of where you're going to go, right? I mean, we're all doing the same things, just moving the club a different way. You get the body to move differently, or vice versa.
I think, it's just what are you good at doing? How do you add value to the client? What data can you interpret very well? And where can you find the low hanging fruit? For me, it's funny because people come into my space and I've got this big space. It's really cool. It's awesome, and like they come in and they warm up and they do their thing, and everybody's like kind of doing that, and then it's like okay, I watch them hit a few. I kind of talk to them a little bit, and then it's like as a coach, and you know this very well, in your head you're thinking, okay, they do this, okay, I want to kind of change that, or I want to maybe kind of manipulate this slightly differently, or whatever the case may be. And then next thing you know, you take them over and put them on force plates. And then wouldn't you know it, and this is me being honest, like 40 to 50% of the time, what I think I want to do with that client goes completely out the window the minute I put them on force plates. Because a lot of the things that I'm seeing, sometimes I trick myself and I forget that's happening for a reason. So if I have a player who's just dumping it out and losing all their speed and all that stuff that we tend to see, long story short, we got to get them to understand how they're applying pressure to the ground and that they're not doing so, and whatever the case may be. So it's just one of those things, man, to where you got to kind of figure it out as you go, and you have to understand like every piece of technology can be good, but it also can be bad if that person's not prepared to hear what you have to say, showing it that way.